43 years. That is the number economists say it takes a nation to rebuild its economic identity after its primary trade relationship collapses beneath it. 43 years, nearly half a century, 2 full generations of policy, pain, and rebuilding. And right now, Canada is staring directly into that number, measuring it, calculating whether it ever has to live it. But the man holding the measuring tape is not sweating. He is not scrambling. He is not making noise. He is doing something far more unusual in modern geopolitics. He is thinking. Welcome to Global Conflict Feed. I am David, and today we are going to go beneath the headlines, beneath the tariff announcements, the press briefings, and the diplomatic language, to show you the real architecture of what is happening between Canada and the United States. By the time this video ends, you will understand why the quietest man in the room may be playing the most consequential hand. Stay with us, because roughly 4 minutes from now, we are going to show you a single move that Washington has not publicly acknowledged yet. Most analysts walked right past it. Let us begin. Donald Trump did not simply impose tariffs on Canadian exports. That framing is too clean, too sanitized. What actually happened was a deliberate application of economic force at the single most strategically vulnerable moment in Canada's political calendar, the opening of a federal election cycle. Think carefully about what that timing communicates. If your objective is to weaken a neighbor's negotiating posture, you do not strike when their government is unified and confident. You apply pressure when internal divisions are loudest, when political leaders are most desperate for a visible domestic win, and when the cost of walking away from a deal feels politically unsurvivable. That was the design. That was the trap. Nearly every geopolitical analyst on the continent expected Canada to step directly into it. They did not. Mark Carney's team looked at the structure of that trap, mapped it, modeled it, studied its edges, and then did something that cut against every instinct of modern political survival. They deliberately chose to slow down, not out of weakness, not out of disorganization. They slowed down because they had identified something about Trump's political architecture that the mainstream media has almost entirely failed to communicate clearly to its audience. Trump's political base operates on a specific rhythm, a need for visible victories, symbolic moments of dominance, and headlines that arrive before the next news cycle erases them. That is not a character critique. It is a structural observation about how his coalition generates and sustains political energy. When you truly internalize that rhythm, something counterintuitive emerges. Any nation willing to make Trump wait is quietly accumulating leverage that the waiting nation itself does not even need to announce. Canada said, in effect, "We are ready, but we will not be rushed," and that patience became a weapon. Now here is the part almost nobody in mainstream coverage has connected properly. Carney did not simply decide to wait. He used the waiting period to do something that has no real precedent in recent Canadian economic history. He began redesigning the trade architecture itself, in real time, under pressure, while simultaneously maintaining cooperative public language toward Washington. Bilateral conversations with the European Union accelerated more in 60 days than they had in the previous 3 years. Supply chain negotiations with Indo-Pacific partners that had previously moved at a polite academic pace suddenly became urgent and operational. Canada was not sitting by the phone hoping for a call from Washington. Canada was quietly, systematically constructing alternative exits. Here is the number that reframes everything. Canada sends roughly $400 billion in goods annually to the United States. On the surface, that sounds like a chain, evidence of total dependency. But drill one layer deeper and the picture changes dramatically. 41% of Canada's most strategically critical exports, in energy, critical minerals, and advanced manufacturing, are now in active renegotiation with non-American buyers. 41%. 18 months ago, that process was less than 10% complete. That is not retreat. That is a controlled, deliberate pivot. And Carney is engineering it while simultaneously keeping the diplomatic door to Washington open, projecting calm and giving Trump no clean target. He is running two foreign policies simultaneously. The public-facing one keeps the relationship functional. The second one, the one operating beneath public view, is the one that actually determines Canada's future. Consider the psychological precision of that construction. Trump's team watches the visible Carney and sees a cooperative, measured counterpart who is not grandstanding, not escalating, and not handing the United States a villain narrative. That optics management is completely intentional. It denies Trump the confrontation he could amplify, keeps the relationship short of full rupture, and buys exactly the time Carney needs to complete the infrastructure he is building. This is not idealism. This is cold, structured strategy, and by every measurable indicator, it is working. But here is the moment that defines the entire standoff. 3 weeks ago, behind closed doors, Carney's team delivered a message to their American counterparts so precisely constructed that it sounded reasonable on the surface and carried enormous weight underneath. The substance of that message, confirmed by those with knowledge of the communication, amounted to this: Canada is prepared to be Washington's most cooperative partner in the entire Western Hemisphere. Or Canada is prepared to be Washington's most strategically inconvenient neighbor. That decision belongs entirely to the United States. Read that construction again. It is not a threat in the traditional sense. It is a menu, two clearly defined options, with the unmistakable implication that Canada has already done the preparation to execute either one. The invisible line beneath it: we have already begun building the second path. If you want us to stop, make an offer worth stopping for. That is leverage, real leverage. Not the performative kind, but the kind backed by actual alternatives and actual willingness to act. Now let us examine Trump's position honestly, because it is significantly more constrained than his public posture suggests. The tariff pressure on Canada was never economically clean. American industries that depend directly on Canadian inputs, steel, aluminum, automotive components, energy, are absorbing real costs, and those costs are moving through supply chains toward American consumers. Trump's base has demonstrated a tolerance for short-term economic discomfort framed as long-term dominance. But that tolerance has limits, and those limits are tied to a clock, and that clock runs on domestic political pressure points, not Ottawa's schedule. Here is the number Washington would prefer you not focus on. Approximately 2.2 million American jobs are directly supported, not tangentially connected, directly supported, by the U.S.-Canada trade relationship. These are jobs in swing state manufacturing districts, in exactly the blue-collar communities Trump cannot politically afford to hemorrhage. Every week the standoff continues without resolution. That number functions not as pressure on Carney, but as pressure on Trump. Carney's team has modeled this precisely. This is why the marathon approach is not a gamble. It is a calculated bet on the fundamental arithmetic of American electoral politics, and almost no mainstream outlet is framing it in those terms. Here is what most analysts are getting wrong, and it reframes this entire confrontation. They are calling it a trade dispute. It is not a trade dispute. It is a sovereignty negotiation wearing the costume of tariff language. What Trump's team is actually pushing for, visible when you read the underlying demands carefully, is a structural realignment of Canadian economic and regulatory policy toward permanent American preference. Not better terms on specific goods, not a temporary tariff adjustment, a structural lock-in that would permanently constrain Canada's ability to pivot toward non-American partners in the future. What Carney is resisting is not a number, it is a cage. When you see it through that lens, every element of his strategy snaps into focus. Of course, he is building alternative trade routes while keeping conversations polite. Of course, he is accelerating Indo-Pacific and European relationships. Of course, he is refusing to rush toward any agreement. Every week, Canada operates without an American deal and without economic collapse. It demonstrates to its own population, to European governments, and to Indo-Pacific partners that Canada functions as a viable, genuinely independent economic actor. Every week of demonstrated independence is a proof of concept. Now, here is where the stakes move beyond this particular standoff, and this is the part that will stay with you. The decisions made in the next 90 days will not only determine how this confrontation resolves, they will establish the template for how every mid-sized democratic nation manages its relationship with a dominant trading partner willing to deploy economic pressure as a geopolitical instrument. Australia is watching. South Korea is watching. Japan, Poland, the Netherlands, every nation simultaneously dependent on American security guarantees and exposed to American economic pressure, is watching this play develop in real time. If Carney successfully redirects enough strategic trade, builds genuine alternatives, and ultimately negotiates from a position of real optionality rather than desperation, he will have demonstrated something geopolitical strategists will study for decades, that there is a third path, not capitulation, not confrontation. A quiet, methodical, deeply prepared pivot that blunts the pressure without triggering the escalation that open confrontation invites. When you see Carney in front of cameras using measured, cooperative language and declining to match Trump's rhetorical energy, that is not weakness on display. That is the strategy executing exactly as designed. The moment Canada appears to be fighting, Trump has a narrative villain. The moment Canada appears to be struggling, the pivot loses credibility with the very partners Carney is trying to attract. The calm, almost maddeningly reasonable public posture is simultaneously denying Trump an exploitable confrontation and signaling to the world that Canada is a stable, rational partner worth investing in. The composure is the message. The composure is the strategy. Trump's window for a headline-worthy, politically valuable deal is not permanent. Congressional dynamics, domestic economic indicators, and political calendar pressure are all compressing the period during which a visible U.S.-Canada resolution actually delivers the narrative benefit Trump's operation is looking for. If that window closes without resolution, Trump faces two options: escalate, which carries serious domestic economic risk, or quietly de-escalate, which reads publicly as backing down. Carney has constructed a situation in which time itself functions as Canada's most reliable ally, not dramatically, not obviously, but structurally and methodically, week by accumulated week. The 43 years it takes to rebuild an economic identity, Carney is betting Canada never has to discover what that number feels like from the inside, because he is building the infrastructure for genuine independence right now, in real time, under pressure, while keeping the relationship intact. That is either the most sophisticated act of economic statecraft a Canadian leader has attempted in modern history, or it is a historic miscalculation whose consequences will echo for a generation. In a world of sprinters racing toward tomorrow's headline, the most formidable person in the room is the one who arrived ready to run a marathon and already knows where the finish line stands. Drop your read in the comments right now. Does Carney's marathon hold, or does Trump find a way to force Canada's hand before the pivot is complete? That debate is genuinely open. If this analysis gave you something the mainstream cycle did not, hit that like button. It genuinely helps Global Conflict Feed reach people who want this depth of coverage. Subscribe, because this channel exists for exactly the analysis that does not make the front page, but absolutely should. David out.